Science of Drexel University, managing research, computing, and data systems. Here, Heather develops her passion for scientific data and her fondness for bash, log files, and sudo. Heather then spent time preserving the history of code and computing at the Computer History Museums and preserving the history of natural science at the California Academic Science. There, as a head librarian, Heather served as a principal investigator on two national research grants focused on building the infrastructure to create connections between the library, archivals, and scientific data set, telling the history of climate change and our natural world through the published research data, and the primary archival sources. In her current role at MIT, Heather has been fortunate to work with the dedicated team of engineers, technicians, project manager, UX professionals, librarians, and activities to enact an end-to-end modernizations of the MIT libraries technical platform emphasizing robust and cloud-based infrastructure, EIP access to libraries collections, and a human-centered technology culture that prioritize the perspective needs and insights of the library staff and patterns throughout the process of designing and implementations. Heather have been a core member of the MIT Swajan College of Computing Task Force, the MIT Computing Infrastructure Work Groups, and the MIT Committee on Research Computing with advisory role on EBSCO Technology Advisory Board, the MIT Museum Technology Advisory Board, and the MIT IT Policy Committee. Heather is a passionate speaker on ethical and responsible implementation of AIT in higher education, an innovative, inclusive approach to technology staffing, governance, and strategic planning. She has been an invited speaker at Harvard University, the MIT Lincoln's Laboratories annual recent advance in AI for National Security Conference, and the US Library of Congress Machines Learnings and Library Summit. She has delivered the keynote address to the 2023 Vision Conference of Estonian Research Libraries and was featured on the AI-focused closing plenary panel for the 2023 Coalitions for Network Information Summit. Her publication includes generative AI for trustworthy, open, and equitable scholarship published by MIT Press in 2023, as well as the book chapters We Do Hard Things, Making Value-Based Decisions, and we have always been ready AI in academic libraries that will be coming in 2024-25, respectively from the Association of College and Research Library Press. That is a greatly, I think, a greatly research works. So this was a brief introduction to Heather's. I hope you will enjoy her sessions. So without further delay, I shall turn it over to Ms. Heather's to deliver his presentations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nihar. And thank you, Dr. Ganguly, for having me. I'm so excited and happy to be here speaking today with IISER. So hello to everyone in the audience. And as Nihar said, I'm Heather Sardis. I am currently the Associate Director for Technology and Strategic Planning with the MIT Libraries. And today I'm hoping to share with all of you some of the tools and techniques that we use to do strategic planning in our library, and then talk a little bit about our technology strategy and what we're focusing on. It's really my hope that that there's something in this talk that is useful for everybody. So I will begin screen sharing in just a moment. And then I will also paste in the chat a link to what I'm calling our strategic planning toolkit. So this folder has a number of tools that I'm going to talk about in today's talk. You can download them. They may be useful for you as you're doing strategic planning in your organization. And I'll refer back to that toolkit throughout the talk. So, okay, let's begin. So our agenda for today's webinar, I'm going to start by talking about strategic planning. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about how we define strategy at the MIT libraries, and then I'll focus on 3 important aspects of strategic planning, and I will share some tools that can be useful to do each of those parts: environmental scanning, prioritization, and then resourcing. And then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about our technology strategy, focusing in particular on resource discovery and access, data and computation, AI and machine learning. And then depending on how much time we have, I'll talk a little bit about our approach to technology governance. I'll close with reflection on strategic planning as a tool for making change. And then I'll just reshare our strategic planning toolkit. So a brief introduction to myself. As I said, I'm currently with the MIT libraries, but throughout my library career, I have worked in many different roles in the library. I started out as a front desk assistant at Carnegie Mellon University in the engineering library. I've also worked as a software developer, a database manager, an archivist, a librarian. And so I like to say that at some point in my career, I have sat in every seat in the library. And so I really understand the challenges that you're all facing and that we share together as we build libraries and facilitate access to information. I'm very passionate about the work that we all do together. I think that libraries are such an important part of the institutions that we're in and the societies that we're in. And so it's my aim to just provide as much information and help and support as possible so that we can all make access to information easier for the patrons that we serve. So I'll start out with a poll because I would love to hear from all of you. So before we begin the content of the presentation, I want to ask you all, how confident at this point do you feel about leading strategic planning in your organization? And you can choose not very confident, somewhat confident, very, very confident, just to get a sense of where we're all at as we start. And I'll give about 20 seconds to fill out the poll. Okay, I'll share the answers in just a second. So if you'd like to add your vote, now is a good time to do it. Okay, I'll share back now. So it looks like we have a pretty good mix. We have some folks that are feeling very confident, which is great. We have some folks that are feeling somewhat confident. We have some folks that are not feeling so confident. And I think that's very normal. Strategic planning, it can be challenging. It can be very, very useful, but it can also be challenging because you can do it in many, many different ways. And it really comes down to what your organization or your team most needs, and then choosing the strategic planning techniques that are a best fit for your needs. So it's my hope that by the end of this talk, you'll have a couple more tools that you can reach for when you are leading strategic planning in your organization. And I will share what's worked for us. That may or may not work for you, but hopefully there will be something useful in there. So I'm going to end this poll. And then I'll invite folks to share in the chat a question that I find really helpful at the start of any strategic planning process, which is when you think about the work that you're doing in your organization right now, what are some of the most important problems that you're trying to solve? You may not have solved them yet. You may not know where to begin to solve them, or you may be deep, deep in the work of solving them. But please feel free to share in the chat what are some of the most important problems that you're trying to solve in your organization right now. I see one response, insufficient staff with technology capability. And I think that that is a very important challenge in libraries, definitely. Building consensus, yes, that's always a challenge. And some of the tools I'll talk about could help build consensus among different folks. Lack of funding, lack of space. I think many libraries also share that challenge. Yeah, lack of funding and a lack of space is a big theme. And some of what we'll get into talking about prioritization will hopefully help with that. Lack of funding, yes, adapting new technology. So a lot of what you're saying resonates. And I think many libraries share those challenges, which is why I think strategic planning is so critical for libraries, because it's a tool that we can use to work through that lack of funding, to work through a lack of space, and to make critical change in a way that is most impactful for our patrons and our communities. So with that, I will begin the introduction. So strategic planning at its core is a way to take your mission and your ideas and translate them into goals, actions, and implementation. So if you're in an organization that has a strong mission, which as librarians and libraries, we have that strong mission. Our mission is to connect people with the information that they need to do great work. That is a great starting point. Strategic planning is the tool that we use to translate that mission into goals, actions, and implementation. Strategic planning often involves environmental scanning, which is a way of asking what needs to change in your organization to meet that mission. It often involves prioritization, which is choosing where you can have the most meaningful impact, especially when you have limited resources. What are you going to invest those resources in, and what might you not do? It often involves work on resourcing, deciding what resources do you need to act on your most important priorities. Where are you going to get those resources? How are you going to use the limited resources that you might have? And then it often involves implementation, which is moving from planning into action. So what work will you do to carry out your strategy? So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about each of those different steps, but I will say strategic planning, this is one way of doing it, and there are many different ways. So it's really, like I said, about choosing the most important components of strategic planning for your organization and the work that you're trying to do. So we'll start with building your team. When you're beginning any sort of strategic planning process, it's very important to know who is participating in the planning. And that answer depends on the unique needs of your organization. Strategic planning could be done by a single librarian managing a service alone and looking to make small improvements. And I've done strategic planning as one librarian on my own, and it's been amazingly helpful. Strategic planning could also be done by, for example, a group of directors who are setting the overall strategic direction for a whole organization. I think that's a common way to think about strategic planning. But strategic planning could also be done by a team of librarians and engineers, for example, who are managing a repository and want to create a technical roadmap. So it could be really any different combination of librarians, directors, technicians who are seeking to make change in their organization. And as they go through that process, they may be consulting with a broader group of staff during that strategic planning process. So before you begin any type of strategic planning, it's a good idea to be clear with yourself, with your teams, and with your staff who is participating, who will be consulted, and who makes the final decisions. So once you have a sense of who your team is and who are making the decisions about strategy, then you can begin the process of planning. And a great place to start is with something we call environmental scanning. It usually is a useful first step because it helps you to understand the current state of your organization and where you want to go in the future. And it can be used to understand and anticipate risks that might come your way and the changing needs of library patrons. So I'm going to share today 2 tools that can be helpful with conducting this initial environmental scan at the start of a strategic planning process. One tool is what we call a SWOT analysis, SWOT. The other tool is what we call a steeple analysis. And if you are in the strategic planning toolkit, I will repost the link in the chat. You'll see that I have some tools and templates that you can use for conducting these types of analyses. So to begin with, a SWOT analysis is a very simple tool that you can use either by yourself or with a team that you're planning with to scan your current state of your organization. This is really just a tool for you to have a discussion with your team. And you would ask your team and talk together about what are your strengths? What are you doing well already? Where are you already meeting critical needs for your patrons? Then you might discuss your weaknesses. Where do you have gaps or where do you have needs? And you want to grow in that particular area. What are the opportunities that you have available to you? Maybe there's the opportunity to collaborate with faculty. Maybe there's the opportunity to work with your patrons more closely to understand their needs. So what are some opportunities that you have not yet fully taken advantage of? And then what are the threats in your environment? Maybe budget cuts could be a threat. Maybe lack of space could be a threat. A changing political landscape could be a threat. What are some of the things that might impact your work that you want to think about and plan ahead for? And so a SWOT analysis basically is just a framework for a conversation to get some information down on paper and start building a shared sense with your team of your organization's current state and where you might want to make change. And that idea of identifying where you want to make change, that's where we focus our strategic planning, on the changes that we want to make to grow as an organization. So another tool that you can use, which is very similar, is called the steeple analysis. And steeple is an acronym that stands for social, technological, economic, environmental, political, legal, and ethical. It's very similar to a SWOT analysis in that it is also a framework to have a conversation about the risks and impacts that might come to your team or your organization in the next couple of years. And so doing a steeple analysis also basically involves taking time to think about each of these different external factors. For example, technology, new or emerging information technologies. Your organization will need to understand them, adapt to them, and adopt them. Economic factors like inflation or recession or changing budgets. Legal factors like regulatory requirements that affect your work. So I'm not going to go too far in depth on how to conduct the steeple analysis, but you'll find the tool and some instructions for conducting a steeple analysis in the strategic planning toolkit that I've shared. So I'll post that in the chat one more time. And so basically, the SWOT analysis enables you to look at the current state inside your organization, what you're strong at, where you're weak at, what your opportunities are. The steeple analysis enables you to look outside of your organization at risks or threats or impacts that might change the way that you do your work. And once you've had those conversations, environmental scanning, you have a lot of information from yourself, from your team, and from outside of your organization that can inform where you want to focus your strategic planning. So when we've done this work at the MIT libraries, we used these 2 tools, and where we ended up at the end of our environmental scanning process was we began building a list of potential strategic initiatives that we felt would address our biggest challenges. Like I said, we identified areas where we wanted to change or areas where we wanted to grow, or areas where we felt our work was already strong and we wanted to build on it. And the results of that work were that we wanted to continue investing in our strengths, which at the MIT libraries are open scholarship and open publishing, continuing our work to advance open access. We wanted to continue investing in our resource discovery platforms, in particular, enabling computational use of our platform and computational use of our collections, and overall improving our user experience and user interfaces. And then we wanted to continue investing in our workshops and our events, which are very well attended and popular on the MIT campus. So continuing to grow those student-facing and faculty-facing workshops to encompass data management, AI, etc. We also, in the process of environmental scanning, identified some new challenges and some emerging challenges that we wanted to put greater emphasis on. We've been digitizing our collections, but we really needed to shift into fully digital collections and fully digital services to meet the needs of our patrons. We had to accelerate our work in AI and machine learning technologies, not only implementing them in our organization, but also making our library collections available for use by the folks who are building artificial intelligence and large language models. And we needed to advance our work to support MIT's climate change research, in particular, making sure that that research continues to be openly available globally. And we needed to focus on anticipating the impacts of climate change on our work and the impacts of our work on climate change, especially knowing the energy usage associated with artificial intelligence and how that might contribute or impact climate change. So through the work of environmental scanning, we were able to identify our strength areas that we wanted to continue focusing on and continue growing, and we were able to identify some new and emerging challenges that we needed to place more emphasis on in our strategic planning. So, with that said, once you have done the work of environmental scanning and started to list out initiatives that you want to pursue, it's inevitable that you will be listing more things than you have the resources to accomplish. I think that is universal to libraries and librarians. The work that we do is so complex and so all-encompassing, and we have such incredible aspirations and goals that we will always have more things that we want to accomplish than we have staff and resources to do. So that is where prioritization comes in. And it's a really critical step in any strategic planning process because it is the work of identifying which ideas and which potential initiatives will have the greatest impact for our patrons and our organizations. In our case, we had a huge list of potential initiatives. I mean, 20, 30 different ideas that we could pursue, and all of them felt important and all of them felt valuable, but we had limited resources. And so we had to engage in the work of prioritization to identify which specific things we were going to invest in and what we might set aside. So prioritization could be as simple as ranking potential initiatives by those that are the highest priority, important to begin as soon as possible. Those that are medium priority, maybe they're important but less urgent to do right now, or low priority, things that are important and have value but maybe could wait until later. So I'll talk about a couple of tools that we use to accomplish prioritization. I have a couple of tools in our strategic planning toolkit that can help with this. So one tool that we've used is a strategic alignment matrix. And it's very straightforward. Essentially, as you can see on the slide, it's a tool that lets you put your potential initiatives along one axis of the matrix and, for example, in our case, MIT's priorities along the other axis. You could put your own organization's priorities, you could put your patrons' priorities. It's basically anyone that you want to compare your priorities against their priorities. So as you can see here, we did our matrix focusing on 3 potential initiatives in the libraries: advancing open scholarship, continuing to improve resource discovery, and investing in data and computation. You can see those in the green axis. And then we listed the priorities of MIT, which is our parent organization. And MIT has stated a priority to focus on research in AI and machine learning, of course, continuing research in climate change and really having a strong impact with that research, and then freedom of expression or freedom of academic expression. And so for each of our initiatives, we essentially looked at how it intersected with MIT's priorities. So we looked at open scholarship, and we thought about the work that we're doing to try to increase open publishing and switch journals to publishing openly. How does that support MIT's priority to advance AI and machine learning research? Similarly, how does that priority advance MIT's priorities in climate change? And basically, we just went through one by one, looking at these intersections and thinking about how our proposed initiatives supported or advanced MIT's stated priorities. And an exercise like this can be really useful to help you identify your strengths. So maybe you have an initiative that is very strongly aligned with each of your parent organization's initiatives. That's a good one to keep investing in, and that's a good one to keep growing. And maybe you have an initiative that feels really important to the library, but doesn't necessarily support your parent organization's priorities. That might be an initiative that you'll want to think about. And maybe you might change it, or maybe you might deprioritize it, or maybe you might invest a little bit less resources into that particular initiative in favor of something that might have a greater impact. So you can find more about the strategic alignment matrix in the strategic planning toolkit. And then another very simple tool, it's extremely simple, but it has been extremely powerful and useful for us, is just straightforward voting. In our case, when I had said before that we had about 20 different potential initiatives, that's not an exaggeration. And once we had named all of those different potential initiatives, we quite literally wrote them on paper and taped them up on the wall. And among the directors, we did a voting exercise to identify which initiatives we felt were the most important to invest in and pursue. And that was a great way for us to find out where we were aligned as a directors group and where we weren't aligned, and where we had differences in opinion. And so that enabled us to then talk through those differences and come to a shared agreement about which initiatives were the most important to pursue. So I'm going to post another poll in the chat about prioritization. So when you think about your priorities, that might be your team's priorities, it might be your library's priorities. How well aligned do you feel those priorities are with the priorities of your parent organization? So that might be I'm just going to launch the poll. Okay, that poll is active. So your parent organization, it could be the library that you're a part of. It could be the institute that your library belongs to. It could be also your patrons. Like, you could think about how well aligned your priorities are with your patrons' priorities. And I'm seeing lots of responses come in. So if you'd like to share your thoughts on that question, how aligned are your organization's priorities with the priorities of your parent organization, go ahead and add your votes now. And I'll give it another 3 to 5 seconds before I share the results. Okay, last call for votes. And then I will end the poll now and share back out. So we have a pretty good distribution among the group. A lot of folks are feeling moderately aligned. Some folks are feeling very aligned, which is fantastic. And some folks feel a little unsure or a little less aligned. So these types of tools, especially the strategic alignment matrix, can be a really helpful way to break down exactly where you feel your priorities are well aligned and exactly where you feel they're maybe not so well aligned. And that gives you, as a strategic planner, the information that you need to make some changes and bring your organization's priorities into closer alignment with your parent organization or your patrons. So now I'm going to run one more poll. This one will focus more on library patrons. So how aligned do you feel your organization's priorities are with the priorities of your library patrons? So that could be students, researchers, faculty, it could be the more general public, depending on the type of library that you're working with. And answering this question requires us to know what those needs are. So it usually requires surveying our patrons, talking with our patrons, maybe creating focus groups with our patrons to make sure that we really understand their needs. And importantly, it also requires us to understand the needs of the people who are not yet using the library. So at MIT, we know that we have a really strong and robust group of people who use the library regularly, but there's also a pretty large group of people that are not using the library regularly. And so we try to understand, what do they need and what new services might we offer to reach those folks who are not yet using the library. So I'll end this poll in just a moment and share the results back with everyone. And it looks pretty similar to the previous poll. A lot of folks are feeling moderately aligned with the needs of their patrons. Some folks are feeling very aligned. Some folks have some questions. So there might be some opportunities in there to get to know the needs of your patrons a little bit more so that you can use that information to inform strategic planning. And in the context of prioritization, this type of information, what are the priorities of your parent organization? What are the priorities of your library patrons? That information is really important to use when you, as a strategic planner, are trying to narrow down a list of 10 to 20 potential initiatives down to, let's say, the 3 to 5 initiatives that are the most impactful or the most important. So it's a really important part of the strategic planning process because it helps you to ensure that your limited time and limited resources are invested in the work that is going to make the most impact and the most difference for your institute and for your patrons. So at the MIT libraries, when we did this work, we used the strategic alignment matrix and we used simple dot voting. That helped us to narrow down and shape our list of potential initiatives. Some results on our side, we ended up adding a couple of initiatives that specifically focused on climate change. One of the things that we're considering is how we can use our focus on open access to research and scholarship to support and advance MIT's climate change research. It also helped us to refine our AI-focused initiatives to better address our patrons' needs. When it comes to AI and machine learning, there are many things that the libraries think are important, but it's critical to make sure that that's also matched up with what our patrons actually need and want from us. Like I said, we increased our focus on resource discovery and access, and we added some initiatives that were a little bit more aggressive when it comes to opening up access to scholarship. Before we had begun prioritizing, we had a list of 19 potential initiatives. By doing the work of prioritizing, we were able to narrow that down to 9 initiatives that we felt were the most important to pursue. So let's see. I'm going to, we have a raised hand. Does somebody have a question that they would like to ask, either in the chat or, oh, okay. Please put your questions in the Q&A box only. Let me take a moment and open that up. It looks like I'm having trouble seeing the Q&A box. Could someone share with me what's in there?
Would you like to share this question to chat box? Please, yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, I'll continue on. I'll continue on talking about resourcing, but I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So at this stage in the process, ideally, you have taken some time to do environmental scanning to understand what challenges or problems you need to tackle, and what changes you might want to make in your organization. That work might lead to you listing out a number of potential strategic initiatives, and then you would engage in prioritization to narrow down that list of initiatives to the ones that are most impactful for your organization and your patrons. And then you'll want to engage in resourcing. So resourcing is just a word we use to describe, do you have the staff, the funding, and the expertise to carry out your most important strategic initiatives? Do you have the resources to invest in new strategic initiatives while still maintaining your core set of library services? Because that can often be in tension. It is in our library. I am certain that it is in every library. If you want to do something new or make change, that does require staff time, it does require budget, and that has to come from somewhere, but you still have to continue delivering your core set of reference services, access services, preservation, archival services. So that is a perennial challenge in libraries. We will always be limited in the amount of resources that we have to invest in new work. So resourcing is a tool that we can use to find the right balance between continuing our critical core services and beginning to pursue new initiatives. I'm not going to go into very much depth on this just because I want to make sure we still have time to talk about technology, but you'll find some tools that you can use to evaluate resourcing in the strategic planning toolkit. So I'll just post that link one more time, so that folks have access to those tools. And I'll add a little note. You might want to save this link or download the contents of the toolkit so that you have them available and you can reference them after the webinar is over. So I'll post one more poll. This one is focused on resourcing. And the question for everyone is, are your organization's staff and budget focused on what you would consider to be your top strategic priorities? And that requires us to know what those top strategic priorities are, but I think you can answer that poll just thinking, what are the most important problems that your organization needs to be tackling? And are your staff and your budget invested in solving those problems? And I'm seeing lots of answers coming in, so thank you, everyone. And as you're answering that question, I'll talk a little bit about the strategic capacity matrix. Like I said, I won't get a chance to go over it in the webinar itself, but there's a good tool with some instructions in the toolkit. And that tool basically allows you to assess whether your resources, staff, and funding are invested in your highest strategic priorities, and if they are, what that means for your organization, and if they are not, what you might do to make changes. And some of those changes might look like hiring different types of roles. Some of those changes might look like training staff and building skills in staff. Some of those changes might look like fundraising so that you have new resources to invest. And some of those changes might look like deciding what services you might stop offering in order to free up resources to invest in new priorities. So in just a moment, I will end the poll and share the results back. And we have a pretty good distribution, but not surprisingly, when we talk about resourcing, I'm seeing more folks who feel that the staff and budget are not yet focused on the top strategic priorities. And that is not uncommon. I think that's very normal in libraries because it sometimes takes us longer to make changes. So we might be continuing to offer services that are important, have been in place for a long time, and we are at a change point. We're at a point where we might need to make changes and might need to make shifts in the way that we're investing our resources so that we are most focused on technology services, data services, and digital services that are critical for our patrons. So I'm going to stop sharing the poll. I'll invite people to share in the chat. What are some of those areas that lack the resources needed? What are some of those top strategic priorities that you want to invest in more? And I'm seeing some things that resonate with me, a lack of infrastructure, not enough for training to staff, not enough for library development, not enough in the fields of automation and technology. And I think, again, that feels very close to home. Even at MIT libraries, we do struggle with some of those same challenges because making change takes a very long time, and it's hard work, but strategic planning can help navigate those changes. So I'll do a really quick summary of where we ended up with our strategic planning process at the MIT libraries, and then I'll shift the focus to talk a little bit about our technology initiatives, because I want to make sure that we have some time to share that information. So when we did this work on resourcing at the MIT libraries, we did find a couple of areas where we did have to make change in order to set our organization up to succeed at our strategic initiatives. Some of those areas were investing more resources into training and skill building, and that it takes a lot of work to build the case for that. It does involve talking to your administration. It involves fundraising. It involves really fighting sometimes for those resources. So if you're doing that work in your organization, I feel that, and I'm with you, and I know what that feels like. We had to slow down and sunset some services that were no longer supporting our strategic priorities, and work with the staff in those areas on training and shifting and focusing on some new priorities. And we did identify some areas where we needed to focus on external fundraising, where we weren't necessarily going to have the funds internally. So that's just a quick overview of the type of information that can come from analyzing your resourcing as a part of your strategic planning. And so once you reach that point in the process, you've completed your environmental scan, you've identified the most important problems that you have to solve, you've evaluated what resources you have available, and you've decided what to invest in your priorities. You can then use that information to build a strategic plan for your organization, and that plan can then be used to work with your teams and work with your staff to design projects and guide your team's work. So I've listed here some of the typical components of a strategic plan. You might describe your methodology, you might outline your strategic priorities, you might describe your initiatives in more detail, and then you'll want to talk about the timeline, how long you think it will take to complete that work, the budget, and the resourcing. I'll pause there, just again to shift over to talk about technology. But again, in the strategic planning toolkit, I have included a template that you can use for building a strategic plan. So I hope that that can be useful. It's the template that we use basically to describe what our initiatives are, what we're trying to accomplish and why, what resources we have available and what resources we need. And then we use that to plan out our work. And it really helps to identify the small bits of work that you can do to build towards a larger initiative. So let me just take a quick look at the chat. Thank you, everyone. So now I will shift over and spend a little bit of time talking about resource discovery and access. And I'll talk for about another 5 to 10 minutes, and then I would be happy to invite questions. So after we completed our strategic planning process, which we do every year or two, essentially, we run the same process again to just check in on what our needs are, what our challenges are, and we make adjustments as we go. Throughout that work of strategic planning, we've defined our technology strategy. And so our technology strategy focuses primarily on 3 key areas: resource discovery and access, data and computation, and AI and machine learning. You will find these slides in the strategic planning toolkit that I've shared the link to, so you'll have those available if you want to reference them. So I'll just spend a couple of moments talking about our main focus areas within each of these 3 aspects of technology. Within resource discovery and access, that is our discovery platform, search platform. As I'm sure is the case with your libraries, our platform is very complex. We have several different repositories for different types of content. We have several different entry points for patrons, some of which are a graphical user interface with a search, some of which are an API. We have a number of different ways that we connect people with the information in our collections. And sometimes it can feel very fragmented. So a big part of our technology strategy when it comes to resource discovery and access is trying to create a more consistent experience across all of our different discovery and repository systems. That involves a lot of work on user interaction and user interfaces. And we focus on things like reducing user interaction costs. And what that means is when somebody comes to our website and they want to access information in our collection, how many times do they need to click to find what they're getting to? How many different interfaces do they have to move through to find the article that they were seeking? And how can we, as the technology team, reduce that number of interactions? Because that encourages patrons to keep using our platforms. So that's one key area of our strategy. We also place a lot of importance on creating an inclusive environment. So we focus on accessibility. Our interface is visually accessible. Is the language accessible? And have we made it as easy as possible for people to find open access to articles? Because we don't just serve the MIT community, we serve a global community. And that requires us to make open scholarship openly accessible and make it easy to find in our interfaces. So the last part that I'll highlight on resource discovery is just our technical approach, which is data-informed and agile. And so we really focus on modular technology. We're trying to shift away from monolithic or siloed repository systems and instead have lighter weight, easier to use modules that we can deploy to meet different discovery needs. We primarily use Ruby on Rails. We've been implementing a lot of containerized delivery for the interfaces that we build. And that makes it a lot easier for us to kind of swap in and swap out parts to meet the needs of our patrons. So that's where we're currently at with resource discovery. I'll take a moment to talk about data and computation, because that's been a very large focus of the MIT libraries and MIT generally over the past 3 to 5 years. MIT has launched an Office of Research Computing and Data. That office sits outside of the library, but we are very close partners with them. They are focused on meeting the raw computing needs of MIT, so building basically high-performance computing and research data storage for MIT. We partner with them as the libraries by focusing on offering services to researchers to support good data management practices. So we help with the creation of data management plans. We provide consultation to researchers in how to manage their data and where to store their data. We partner with them on secure storage of their data. And we really focus on adapting our services to meet the unique needs associated with AI, because the volume of data has exploded. It is very, very high volume data, and that changes the way we think about storing it, describing it, and providing access to it. So within the libraries, we do not aim to collect and store all of the data that is being produced by MIT. Our focus is on working with researchers to understand where that data is being stored. It might be stored in a number of different locations, and we, as the libraries, aim to record the connections between the research that's being produced at MIT and the data that supports that research, and really focusing on documenting and creating strong connections between that research and that data, because that promotes reproducibility of the research and reusability of the data. So that is at the core of our data and computation strategy. And you can see some more detail on this slide about what that means in practice. We are also focused on building data collections. So in addition to our manuscripts and our book collections, we have invested more of our funding into building data collections. So purchasing data sets, making them available, purchasing access to APIs, to different data sets, and really presenting all of that computational information in a way that is useful for the folks at MIT who are doing AI, machine learning, and computational research. And then finally, I'll just spend a moment talking about where we're currently at with AI and machine learning. Our strategy breaks down into generating new research. So the libraries has published an initial paper, and we have some work that will come out in the next year or two on how to apply AI to questions of research integrity, using our skills as librarians to identify the ways in which generative AI in particular can improve research integrity. Within the libraries, we have invested in workforce development and skill building. So going back to our strategic planning, that was one of those areas that we found that we needed to invest in more. And investment doesn't necessarily mean money. It could just mean creating time every week for staff to be able to take trainings and practice and experiment with AI technologies. So a lot of our investment has been in just creating the time in our workday to use AI technologies and learn more about them. A big focus area for us in the next couple of years is advancing the ethical and responsible application of AI technology, focusing on open scholarship, library operations, and research data management. We see that as a critical role for libraries everywhere to play in the adoption of AI. Libraries as a profession are very deeply connected to our values, very deeply connected to the ethics of information access, and that is critical information for our patrons, for our institutions when it comes to the adoption of AI. So I would encourage all libraries to think about how our professional values and ethics can apply in the AI space, and what role we might play on our campuses and with our patrons in advocating for the ethical and responsible use of these technologies. I think that's just a crucial role for libraries to play. And in our case, we are also piloting, testing different AI tools, and looking for where we might integrate AI into our library infrastructure. We are just at the beginning of that work, though I don't want to claim that we've made huge progress. We are just looking for the opportunities where we might begin to apply AI to our platforms. And then finally, focusing on our patrons and our students, we have offered workshops, and educational initiatives to share our information about ethical AI and how it applies to AI usage. So those have been very popular, and I think the libraries is uniquely positioned to communicate about how to use AI ethically, how to protect people's data ethically. So again, I'll just highlight, I think that that is such a critical and important role for libraries in the context of AI and machine learning. So we're reaching the end of the hour, so I want to close. I'll just reiterate that strategic planning at its core is just a way to make change in our organizations. So if you see a change that you want to make, whether it's in your work you're doing yourself, whether it's in your team's work or your library work, strategic planning can be a tool that you can use to define that change and then make that change. And I hope that some of the tools in the strategic planning toolkit can be useful to you to make that change. And I would be happy to take any questions that folks would like to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather, for the nice presentation. Excellent presentation, really. So you have covered a lot of things, starting from the strategic planning that could apply for the staples analysis, how the institute to prioritize the library can initiative, all those things, and the implementation of technology, including the AI. So it is a great presentation, really. Let's take the questions, a couple of the questions you have. Please raise your hand who would like to ask question to Heather, or put your questions on the question QA box.
I see a question in the chat.
Okay.
Is there any linkage with strategic planning and CSR? What is CSR?
I think corporate social responsibility.
Yes, I think that strategic planning can apply to truly anything that we want to do. Even, like I said, you could even use it as an individual librarian if there's an adjustment that you want to make in the work that you're doing. So yes, I think maybe because I do strategic planning, I see a link between it and everything. Even, making updates to the house, we can use strategic planning techniques. So yes, I would say definitely. I see a hand up from Laxman Rao. Please go ahead and share your question.
Professor Laxman Rao is a senior professor in India. So please, can you please unmute him?
Good evening. I congratulate for your presentation. Your environment is totally different from Indian environment. Generally, the academic administrators feel that anyway the students and academic library users are not coming to the library. Therefore, there are many institutions which don't have librarians at all. And second thing, because they don't have finances, they talk in a negative manner, saying that what library can do today, you have so much of internet resources. And also, their concentration is textbook oriented. So therefore, whatever you are talking about strategic planning, they are really good, but only few institutions are following, like IISER, where the scientists are very much interested in research and they look for the latest information. But most of the academic libraries, they don't do. So under those circumstances, we are looking for an alternative tools like AI tools or other technology tools, which can help us in providing the information or library service, whatever you may call. So under these circumstances, could you tell us what are the technologies that are likely to be likely to come up in near future, which will be useful for the libraries like in developing countries or underdeveloping countries? What are the technology tools or technology changes that are likely to come in near future?
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing some of the differences in the way the library systems work. And the question is a very good one. Obviously, I can't predict exactly what will happen, but from conversations and observations and readings and talking with colleagues at MIT, I think that resource discovery is likely to be very profoundly changed in the next couple of years with the advent of generative AI and AI applied to search and discovery. So I think that will be a space to keep an eye out. The main challenges right now are that because so much of the scholarly record is locked behind paywalls, the types of AI-driven tools that are available right now cannot be trained on it and cannot access it. So a lot of the questions that we're getting at MIT from researchers, from startups, are how they can begin to train large language models and AI tools on scholarly resources and scholarly records. So some of the ideas that I have heard are there are folks that want to develop AI tools, for example, that can help in writing academic papers. How can an AI tool be used to generate images that accompany a paper? And how can an AI tool be used to generate descriptions of figures and so on? So there are some groups that are developing large-scale discovery tools, and there are some groups that are developing more niche use case tools, but I would expect to see many, many more tools in those particular areas becoming available in the next couple of years. And the pace of that development will depend on having access to essentially library collections, large collections of structured information and large collections of scholarly information. Does that answer your question?
Yes, please. That is fine. Because, I understand definitely the changes that are likely to come in. But I have one more comment. I think I can get a response from you. See, first question is, now you take an example of a cataloging, it is likely to change. Now they are likely to give connectivity linkages to the data, which may be in your library or may not be in your library. That is one of the technology that is expected to come in future, very soon. So under these circumstances, in the context of the AI, what will be the impact on library services? Actually, you have referred that library services and library staff, because they have to update it at every point of time. So what will be the impact of AI and AI tools on library staff, library services, and the recruitment, please?
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and one that I think about every day. I think it's on all of our minds in the library world and the research world, because the things that generative AI is good at are the same things that libraries have historically been good at. And so that could be a great strength, or that could be a great risk. And thinking about it in the context of strategic planning, if we think about that SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, it might show up in both the strengths and the threats column. And so where I think libraries can turn this into a strength is by recognizing that if we learn to use these tools and we learn to embrace them and use them to enhance our work, it will actually enable us as libraries to serve many more patrons. I think this is something that we talk about at MIT, which is, yes, AI is often good at many of the things that we do. And we struggle a lot with backlogs. We struggle with descriptive cataloging backlogs. We struggle with metadata backlogs. We struggle with archival backlogs. So having a tool that is good at solving those same problems could actually become our greatest strength if we take the time to learn and build our skills and think proactively about how to adopt and adapt those tools to our environment. And so I think AI and generative AI specifically could have a great benefit for libraries, especially when it comes to improving metadata, addressing metadata issues, describing materials in our collection, describing materials in our archives, and drastically improving our resource discovery interfaces. But it is important that we as librarians step forward to lead that change and step forward to learn how to use those tools. I also think that we have an important role to play in academia in thinking about ethical adoption of those tools, and how to use those tools in a way that protects people's data, and that respects the people that created the data. So I think there are many roles that we can play, but it is our responsibility in libraries to step forward, learn about the tools, build our skills, and look for the ways that we can use them to enhance and expand our work.
Madam, lastly, I'm sorry, I'm asking. See, what is happening? Any change in the technology and technology application is becoming a responsibility of the librarian to learn. It may be change in the subject, change in the application of the technology, developments, whatever it is. And whereas they have to be on their toes to learn, to implement, to practice. Otherwise, everybody starts questioning. But whereas in other departments, other teachers, they learn their subject and they're happy. But here, don't you think that it is going to be, it's becoming a burden to the library staff to learn every damn thing, including technology application, developments in the subject everywhere? Don't you think it is really a burden for the librarian? What is your suggestion, or what is your suggestion solution, please?
That's a great question. And I think it goes back to this idea. I always try to bring everything back to strategic planning, that strategic planning is change management. Strategic planning is a way of making change. And I think you can expand that out to libraries to say that to be a librarian, especially now in an age of such rapid technological change, is to become a change expert. And I think that being able to adapt to change and navigate change, it is a very important part of the librarian toolkit, because especially when it comes to AI, we are just at the beginning of this. There's a professor at Stanford University, Dr. Fei Li. She wrote the book, The Worlds I See. She's an influential AI researcher. She has likened this moment in time in AI's development to pre-Newtonian physics. So, we're just getting started and we haven't really settled the models yet. We haven't really established the norms. So there isn't anything yet to settle into. It is a massive change process, and that's likely to continue. And so I think the way that libraries can thrive is to embrace that change and to use tools like strategic planning, to use tools like change management to be able to navigate those changes. But it can be exhausting, to your point. And sometimes it feels like we are supposed to be ahead of the game and experts on everything, even when it hasn't fully been developed yet. So I feel that I feel that pain. But I've also seen libraries navigate these types of changes before beautifully. You can even go all the way back to the invention of the printing press, which was a seismic change in the way information is created and disseminated. And we've been able to navigate those types of changes before. So I believe that we have it in us as librarians to navigate that change.
Thank you, Professor Rao, for the questions which are much relevant to the current practice. So I have a couple of questions. Dr. Tripura asked that can the pistils analysis be used instead of staple?
Sorry, where can I find that?
Uh, it is from the top, I think, fifth row. Yeah.
Yes. The pestle analysis. Yes, absolutely. And they're functionally the same type of analysis. It's just a slight reorganization of the concepts. So steeple is social, technological, ethical, environmental, political, legal, and economic, if I remember correctly. And pestle is, it starts with political, but yes, they both work well, and both types of analyses are a way to spark a conversation about external impacts and just get you and your team thinking about what risks or impacts might be coming your way in the next couple of years, so that when you're planning, you can plan ahead and you're not surprised by something that might happen. So great question. And yes, they can be both used interchangeably.
Some other questions like Prince Sharma said, is there any SWOT analysis tools? Kindly suggest some good one if possible.
Oh, yes. Thank you. And I did intend to include a SWOT analysis tool in the toolkit, and I did not have time to make it. I would say if you go into the slides for my presentation and find the slide on the SWOT analysis, that can serve as the tool. Basically, all we usually do is just create a grid with 4 squares, and in one square we put strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and then just fill it out together. And if you look online, you'll usually also find some free tools to do a SWOT analysis. So I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance to put that in the toolkit, but I think you'll be able to find that one online pretty easily.
Prince Sharma asked that how does MIT face challenges related to physical and online libraries? I think he might be asking about that being a MIT is a big library. Do you face any challenges regarding the physical and any online resources while managing or procuring the demand as per the demand of the users?
Yes, it is a challenge. And at MIT, we have a large engineering faculty. We have a large science faculty. And we also have humanities faculty, music faculty, literature faculty, and architecture faculty. And they all have different needs when it comes to wanting collections digitally or physical books. And so we are always having to make critical decisions about what are we doing with our library spaces, which parts of the collection do we make available digitally versus physically. And the way that our students have used the physical spaces of the library has also changed a lot over the last couple of decades. It goes from, used to be that students would come in, look for books and check them out, but now the library physical spaces are often a quiet place to study. And so we renovated our spaces so that they have more seating, more outlets for students to plug in their laptops, more rooms where students can work together and collaborate. I always say one of the most popular changes that we made in our physical space in the last 2 years was just to offer monitors, like just computer monitors that students can come and use. And so it really goes back to knowing what your patrons need and then making changes that might not be universally popular, but that ensure that you're using your physical spaces and your digital collections in the way that meets the most critical needs of the widest set of patrons.
Okay. Do you have any questions, or you can skip anyone? Yeah, what are the main pillar of the strategy planning for the academic libraries? Someone, Naveen, the we also asked this one.
I would say that it might be different for every academic library. And so that was why I wanted to focus on tools and techniques for strategic planning rather than saying, here's specifically what we did and what others should do, because I think it's unique to the needs of your library. But if I was going to identify pillars of strategic planning that are important for academic libraries, it would really be taking the time to do an environmental scan and understand what your needs and challenges are, and being really thoughtful about how you prioritize. I think prioritization has been the most important part for us in strategic planning because we all have limited resources, and taking that time to prioritize helps us to make sure that we're making the best possible investments. And then from a strategic standpoint, what we tend to focus on in our library is continuing to fight for open access to scholarship and continuing to make sure that our technology platform is as robust and useful as it can be, and beginning to incorporate new technologies and trying to stay ahead of the curve on that.
Thank you, Heather, for the interactions and the nice presentation. Really, your session was very interactive, running through the poll questions also. So now the time is for vote of thanks. I request my assistant librarian Snehasis Das to give a vote of thanks. Snehasis, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we come to the conclusion of this insightful and engaging webinar on technology and strategy in the academic libraries, it is my privilege to extend the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed director, Professor Asif Evangelist, for delivering the inaugural address. Your insightful words have provided a strong foundation for our discussions today. I would also like to express my sincere appreciation to our distinguished speaker, Mr. Sardis. Your expertise and the valuable insights you have shared today have been instrumental in understanding the evolving landscape of academic libraries. You have explained nicely the environmental scanning and strategic planning, different prioritization tools, and applications of technology at MIT libraries. A special thanks to our librarian, Dr. Nihar Patashar, whose meticulous planning and organization have been crucial in the seamless execution of this event. Your commitment to enhancing our library services and promoting educational initiatives like this is greatly appreciated. Our heartfelt thanks goes to all the participants. Your active engagement, thoughtful questions, and enthusiasm have enriched our discussions and made this webinar truly interactive and productive. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge the diligent efforts of our library team members, Sangeeta, Narendra, and other members for ensuring the smooth running of this webinar. Thank you once again to everyone for your participation and valuable contributions. We look forward to your continued participation in future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Yeah.